walking around and you look at a big tree, does it ever cross your mind who planted that tree? Or there must have been a sapling before this tree grew so big? No, usually not. You just go, enjoy the tree, you climb the tree, or you sit under its shadow and enjoy it. We rarely think that someone must have planted a seed. Someone must have nurtured a sapling. And then somebody must have pruned the tree to make it grow like this, to be so big and so noticeable. Well, that is something which is common with wars. Wars is something we notice because they have become wars. We rarely think to examine where does this war come from? How did it happen? How did it develop? Who planted the first seeds of discontent to make people unhappy, to make them fight each other? The war is the end manifestation of a series of events which have discontent in them. Hi, my name is Sunur, and I'm going to tell you a bit about my first-hand experience when I saw seeds of conflict being planted in 1999 in Macedonia, and then in the year 2001, how I saw those seeds of conflict turn into a full-fledged war. When one mentions the year 1999, there are two things that come to my mind. One is what I was doing, and the second is what I ended up doing. In 1999, I was a practicing cardiac surgeon, which is a heart surgeon, and my daily routine was working 10 hours in the operating theatre, mending hearts, and then after those 10 hours of work, being on call for emergency duty. Now that time coincided with my dating a gorgeous, lovely woman who was actually a lawyer, someone working to protect the rights of refugees and human rights in general. She was working with the UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So in the month of May in 1999, she got an emergency call from Macedonia, which was right next to Bulgaria where we were living. And she went there, and it was an emergency crisis. There was a huge influx of refugees coming in from Kosovo into neighboring Macedonia. The borders were all jam-packed, they were blocked, and she was there working day and night, helping the Macedonian government cope with this, provide legal protection to the refugees, making sure that their rights are not violated, that they are protected legally. And when she came back over a weekend in Sofia and narrated the misery that was happening to the refugees, the problems they were facing, and what an acute shortage they have, especially of doctors to help with these cases, with these refugees, I was very much motivated to go and volunteer and try and do my bit. Now, when I approached my bosses with a request for leave, they thought I had gone completely cuckoo. They felt that probably this is some passing wave of humanitarianism which is making me want to take leave and go and work on this. However, grudgingly, they did give me leave for a month, and I traveled to Macedonia to work with the UNHCR as a medical consultant. And while driving through the mountains and passing the border between Bulgaria and Macedonia, all the time I was wondering what sights would I see once I arrive. Once I arrived in Skopje, I went to the UNHCR office, and there was a small team, and it was called the Humanitarian Evacuation Program Team. Macedonia as a country has 2 million people, and it has an Albanian minority of something between 22 and 30%. And the refugees that were coming into Macedonia from neighboring Kosovo were also of the Albanian ethnicity. So if one would put together the Albanians from Macedonia and the incoming refugees, one would understand the fears of the government of Macedonia. They felt that with the coming in of refugees who are the same ethnicity as that of their own minority, that might tilt the power balance in their country. So they said to the international community that we are going to close our borders, and we will accept only that number of refugees come into the country, as many as those who would get evacuated from Macedonia into other European countries. During my first briefing at the UNHCR, we were given maps of the country, we were given locations of the refugee camps, and each refugee camp was actually being organized and manned by one of the armies of the NATO countries. Do you know what the NATO is? NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, an organization that brings together a number of countries into a military alliance, and they act in unison. So the NATO countries had offered to take medical cases from refugee camps into their own countries so that the tension at the borders of Macedonia would be less and more people would be able to enter. So after being given the maps, we were given radios so that we can communicate with the headquarters in Skopje, we can communicate with other team members, and then we were given the radio code. So that is something that I had to learn. So just the way you say alphabets A, B, C, D, the radio code has words which are assigned to these alphabets so that when two people communicate, there is no misunderstanding. So Alpha is A, Bravo is B, Charlie is C, Delta is D. Then I was assigned a driver who spoke Albanian language. I spoke Bulgarian, which is very similar to Macedonian. And we were assigned a vehicle which was a four-wheel drive with a huge antenna on the front. And then we set off to visit the first refugee camp. The first refugee camp that I visited was at a place called Chegrane, and it was being manned by the German army. When I arrived there, it was a sea of humanity, full of people, walking, talking, busy, doing things. People had started organizing their lives around the tents which they were assigned. And then I met the officers that were running the camp, and they were part of the German army. So they showed me around the camp, the facilities that were there, the kitchen that was preparing food for the refugees, the security arrangements, and then they took me to the medical team. Each refugee camp had medical teams which were set up by different NGOs such as Save the Children or the International Rescue Committee or the Catholic Relief Services. They all had small camps with doctors working in them, examining patients, providing treatment. I entered some of the tents to see the living conditions, and within one tent you could have anywhere between 10 to 20 people. Children, elderly, families have moved together. And that is when I started looking at some of the medical cases that the local doctors had seen. You had elderly patients who had crossed the mountains in the winters, in the cold. Their toes were almost falling apart. They were with gangrene because of the cold, so they had to be amputated. There was a kid who was barely 3 years old who would be playing merrily and suddenly would shriek in pain. And then I learned from the x-rays that she had shrapnels along her spinal cord, which needed to be removed. There are a lot of cases of people who just had to disrupt their treatment, people who were having things like diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer treatment. From one day to another they had to interrupt their treatment and flee. Now, one thing that surgery prepares you well for is to do something which is called triage. Triage is making a call between two cases which might seem to be equally difficult and making a decision which one to protect or to save first. My job was basically to go around the refugee camps, meet with the doctors who were working in the camps, and from the cases that they have examined, make a call, make a triage on which are the cases that need to be evacuated on a priority basis. So I would go to the camps, meet with the doctors, review the files, and then go and personally examine the patients, understand the complexity, and then decide what would be the best place for them to be evacuated to. The second part of my job was to meet with the delegations from the NATO countries and convince them why this case needs to be evacuated exactly to their country and what would happen to this case if this person was not evacuated. This was a tough sell Because while in the media all countries were saying how keen they were to take these refugees, they did not say that medical cases is something they're skeptical about, because medical cases are very expensive. And in many of these countries, they already have a long waiting list of their own patients. And if these refugee cases would come in, then these lists in their own countries would get even longer, leading to more discontent of their own citizens. My experience in Macedonia showed to me that doing triage in a real-life situation of war and refugee crisis is a different experience. Because there you have the surroundings of people, you have their families, you can see in live the circumstances in which they find themselves, and then you need to take a call. So it's more difficult than in the emergency room where you isolate yourself from all these other factors. So yes, doing the triage was a tough job. How do you decide between a kid and an elderly patient? How do you decide about the prognosis of a patient in that kind of a setting? But what I found to be even more difficult was to convince these country delegations to take these medical cases. And that is where I noticed for the first time that my negotiation skills are actually better than I had thought. And my ability to convince these delegations to take the cases was quite good. So the success rate of acceptance of medical cases was very good. And that is what made me think and rethink on what I want to do in the future. While traveling around refugee camps, traveling around the country, one could see in general the willingness of the local people to help out. And that is not an easy thing to do. At one point, the local population starts feeling that, oh, they are getting much better treatment than we do get. But that is not really the case, because this is a temporary arrangement. And that arrangement lasts while that crisis is in the media's attention. And it very quickly goes away the moment the media goes. It was also heartening to see how the medical community comes together to work. There were doctors from around the world, from different organizations, Doctors of the World, Doctors Without Borders, International Rescue Committee, Mercy Corps, CRS. These are all organizations that have a lot of experience in providing humanitarian aid and assistance. Our mornings would start as early as 6 so that we could reach the refugee camps, and would end close to midnight. There was very little time for food, for rest. We would carry some food with us in the car, we would carry some water. And whichever refugee camp we went to, the army that was running those camps was very warm and welcoming. I never forget my visit to the army camp that was run by the Turkish army. When I arrived there, everything was very disciplined. I was invited to the tent of the camp manager, and in traditional Turkish style, that tent had very beautiful carpets. And then appeared a soldier with some tea and some lokum, which is a Turkish sweet. And then the meeting started. When I went to the German camp, the first thing they asked me was, let's go to the kitchen, and why don't you have some soup before you start work? These are moments where you feel very encouraged, and your faith in humanity and in goodness of people is reaffirmed. When working in humanitarian situations, in situations of war, I think it is not only important that you try and do good, but it's also very important that you do no harm. And that is something one needs to actively think of. Before each action, think, could this lead to any harm? And then the next step is to think, what good I can do. The experience in Macedonia was life-changing for me. I made the decision there that I need to change my careers. I need to move out of the operating theatre into working in areas where I have more interaction with people, where I can lead change directly. The other important decision that I made in Macedonia was to propose marriage to this beautiful lawyer. And surprisingly, she did accept. And today I'm married to her. Let's now talk about the war that I witnessed in 2001 in Macedonia. Have you heard of a country called Fyrom? Fyrom. Fyrom. Chances are pretty slim that any one of you has heard of that country. And that is just an acronym of a name. It is the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Now, before I start talking to you about the war that happened in the year 2001, I need to tell you a bit about Macedonia and how it came about. So you must have heard of the Cold War, when the world had two major superpowers, the United States of America and the Soviet Union. And as it always happens when you have someone powerful, these powerful countries or people, they surround themselves with their friends and allies, and then they become a bloc or a group. Same was the case with the United States of America and the Soviet Union. They had their own allies and their own friends, and they became military blocs of power. Now in 1989, the Soviet Union fell apart. Down came the Berlin Wall. What was the Berlin Wall? That is something for you to check out. However, what happened after the collapse of the Berlin Wall was the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the Allied countries. One of the big allies of the Soviet Union was quite a large country in Europe called Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was made up of many small states which had a population that was ethnically diverse. Suddenly, Yugoslavia was gone and it was replaced by a number of small countries in that territory. When Yugoslavia came apart, Macedonia gained its independence in 1990. A country of 2 million people, it was ethnically very diverse. The majority of people of Macedonia, around 60%, were ethnic Macedonians and were Orthodox Christian. There was a minority. The government says around 22%. Other sources would put them up to 30%, were of ethnicity Albanians. These were mainly Muslims. There were smaller populations as well, smaller minorities of Turkish people and the Roma people. There were other even smaller minorities of the Serbians. All of them together, they formed the Republic of Macedonia. But the moment they gave their country the name the Republic of Macedonia, one of their biggest neighbors, Greece, objected and said, no, we cannot allow you guys to have the name Republic of Macedonia, because within our country we have a territory that is also known as Macedonia, and it actually borders with the Republic of Macedonia. So maybe one day you're going to claim that our Macedonia is your Macedonia. So we object to that. And that led to an objection. The other countries listened, and Macedonia was not allowed to be called the Republic of Macedonia. On the other side of the country, there was a neighbor called Bulgaria. When the Macedonians said that their national language is Macedonian, the Bulgarians objected and said, no. You cannot call your language Macedonian because there is no such language. Actually, Macedonian, according to us, is just a dialect of Bulgarian language. So you cannot have your national language. So the name was gone, the national language was gone, and then the other big neighbor, Serbia, said, oh, well, you don't have any Macedonian culture actually. What you have is Serbian culture. The other neighbor, Albania, said, well, we are more interested in the people who are of Albanian origin in the country and the Albanian culture and their sense of Albanian identity. So when this state was born, all its neighbors surrounding this landlocked country doubted the very elements of identity of this country. So it was born with an identity crisis. The next thing that happened in Macedonia was that the Albanians, who were between 22 to 30%, said, we want to enjoy more our sense of identity. We want to express ourselves in our mother tongue, which is Albanian. And that is why we want the schools, universities in our areas to teach in Albanian language. The Macedonians said, this is not acceptable. Macedonian is our national identity. That is the language that binds our country together. So you will have to follow the curriculum in Macedonian language. If you don't like it, don't go to school. If you don't like it, don't go to university. We basically don't care. Those were the seeds of discontent being planted way back in 1990 by questioning the identity of the country by having a debate, or by not actually having a debate on how minorities feel and how they want to express themselves. The other issue that was very important, it seems, for the minority Albanians was the use of their own flag. They felt a sense of belonging that was related to that flag, and they hoisted it around the public buildings in the cities where the Albanians were in a majority. Now that really upset the Macedonians, because they felt this was in one way a betrayal of the new country, and they said this is not allowed, and they started pulling down the flags from public buildings, and that led to riots in a number of cities in Macedonia. That was the nurturing of that seed of discontent. So the sapling of discontent started growing in Macedonia. People decided not to have a dialogue about it. They decided to stick to their ground and insist on what they thought was right. So there was hardly any discussion, hardly any national process where they would debate these issues of identity and how different groups feel about it. It's just like perhaps in a family where there's a fight over some minor issue and people decide to be so upset with each other that they will not talk about it, and then gradually misunderstandings keep piling on and it grows into a big conflict until one day there's a shouting match or maybe even throwing of objects out of the house or at each other. That is what happened in Macedonia. And by the time of 2001, the two major groups, the Albanians and the Macedonians, they felt so distant from each other. They felt so excluded from each other, and they had such different perceptions of what is loyalty to the state that they went to war. People of Macedonia of Albanian origin fought against the Macedonian armed forces. And today I will tell you a bit about a village where this conflict started, and that made me see the war firsthand and later come to help other people build peace. And that was the village of Tearce. The village of Tearce is in Western Macedonia, close to the city of Tetovo, which has an Albanian and Macedonian population. It is a small village where most of the people are involved in agriculture and some kind of small trading. It is a village which basically is on one long street, and on one side you have the Albanians with their houses, on the other side you have the Macedonians with their houses. Once the conflict reached this village Tearce, suddenly you had neighbors up in arms, shooting at each other, trying to kill each other. Neighbors who until a day ago were friendly, helping each other out, borrowing equipment, farming equipment from each other, trading dishes, etc., suddenly wanted to kill each other. Now, when you guys have fights at home or at school, what do you usually do? You often look for someone who you see as neutral to bring your grievances to, and with the hope that this neutral person would not take sides, would listen calmly to both sides, and offer a solution that is acceptable to both parties. That is what happened in Macedonia. Because Macedonia had such an interesting location where the conflict that was happening in Macedonia could spread to the neighboring countries, which would have created a lot of more refugees, which would have then knocked the doors of European countries, that the bigger European countries thought that it is better that we intervene and help the two sides come to a negotiation and an understanding to stop the war. It was also in their interest, as nobody wants more refugees coming into their country. So they decided to step in. So you had the United States and the European Union, with some of the bigger players within the European Union, which are Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, involved themselves in trying to stop the war in Macedonia. This is 2001. There was fighting around the country. There was shelling. There was gunfire. Macedonian armed forces had helicopters which they were using. It was difficult to stop this conflict. then these bigger countries, they had the diplomatic channels of engaging with both sides. And they got them talking first. Gradually, they got them to stop firing for a while. That is called a ceasefire. A ceasefire agreement was reached, and it was said that within that period they need to find a solution and bring the two parties to the table to start talking and negotiating. So in 2001, with the help of these international mediators, the Albanians and the Macedonians, they met by the lake Ohrid at a secret location and started negotiating. How does one choose who should negotiate on behalf of which group? You choose leaders who have a good following within the population, those who are credible, and those who are willing to talk and reach a settlement. Because there are always some people who want to enjoy a bit more the war, or they have vested interest. Either they are selling arms or equipment or something else. So they would like the war to continue. So it's important to exclude such people from the negotiation process. And that is what the mediators did. They managed to create on both sides two groups which, number one, were interested in a peace settlement, number two, had credibility within their own communities, and number three, was seen as trustworthy by the mediators. The negotiations went on for some time, and finally they reached an agreement which was called the Ohrid Peace Agreement of 2001 that led to the cessation of war. But then, what is a peace agreement? It is just some words written on a piece of paper. However, a peace agreement shows the intent of those who have signed it. The tricky part is, how does it get implemented in the field? How do we convince people who have been just fighting until recently to put their arms down and gradually come back to normal behavior? It is not easy because egos are involved. People are hurt. People have lost property. People have lost dear ones. So there has been a real cost, and people have to come to terms with it and put it behind themselves and want to move forward. And that is where people like myself came in the process of stabilization and peace building in Macedonia. Once the peace agreement was reached in Macedonia, in order to support its implementation among the people, some of these key countries which helped reach the peace agreement decided to fund new initiatives that bring the communities together. They were called the confidence building initiatives. And at that time I was working for a German-Danish organization called the European Center for Minority Issues, which was charged for creating some such mechanisms. So one of the first initiatives was to bring together from different ethnic groups, non-governmental organizations that really want to improve relations between the communities. That was a very tough task to do. However, I felt that this was not impossible. There surely were people who wanted peace. So I started traveling around the country, looking for organizations and testing them and understanding how truly are they committed to bringing peace. Now, can you guess with what kind of organizations did I start first? Who do you think is most interested in peace? Which group of people, in your view, want peace as soon as possible? Think it over. It is women. Women's organizations and women are the biggest messengers of peace. The pain that a mother experiences in losing a son in fighting, the pain that a sister experiences when her brother's leg is amputated, the pain that a wife feels of a husband unemployed because of war cannot be compared to any other category of people. If mothers could have it their way, I think there would be no war in the first place. So I decided to go around the country and look for women's organizations and start working with them and bring them together on a platform to develop inter-ethnic relations. And I must tell you, that initiative was very successful because indeed, women in all these communities around Macedonia were very keen on cessation of hostilities and building peace in their country. So first we built a network of NGOs. We started with only 19 NGOs around the country. Gradually, over a period of 3 years, this network grew into 79 organizations all around the country that were doing all sorts of projects to build peace. Now, what kind of projects would you do to build peace? Perhaps make paper doves and fly them around? Or hug and kiss each other and say, "How much I love you"? Not really. Peace projects are actually about common problems. What I think are vital interventions to bring peace in communities that are just coming out of war. Number one is focus on women. Number two is bring communities together around common problems that impact everyone, like water, sanitation, electricity, education, culture. Number three, improve the economic situation of the community. Make sure employment is there. Make sure there's growth in the community in terms of economics. Bring jobs back. Number four, fight corruption the moment you see the first signs of it emerging. As after conflicts, a lot of money comes into countries from donors. So these are the four things which I think are very important. War seems very distant to us when we are living in peace. However, it is a fragile world. Things move very quickly. Things change very quickly. Even the dynamics of wars has changed. We have less wars between countries nowadays. We have more wars within countries. We have more non-state actors, organizations who are mounting war on states. I now teach students at the university, and I also travel around the world on various assignments, trying to work with communities, trying to help the communities find ways of finding solutions to their local problems, especially in situations that are related to conflict or emergency. Whenever you go out into communities and you talk to people, and when you want to get to the source of your information, you have to do a couple of things to get access to people. The two tricks that I always use is one, I go for a haircut, even if I don't need one. Because barber shops are usually places where everyone talks. So you get a lot of information of what really is happening in the community or how the community feels by going for a haircut. The second is to use local public transport. When you take public transport, you meet real life people from that country and that community who would tell you untwisted versions of reality. Like every other profession, mine too has its own challenges and its own peculiarities. So people who work for peace, they face real life threats. Their threats are to be taken seriously. And if you decide to work in the area of peace, you also need to take these threats seriously and use common sense and security around you to protect yourself. So what do I always carry in my bag when I travel? One is light clothes that can be easily washed and dried. Number two, I carry my camera with me. I carry two phones. One a smart one, one a dumb one. I carry my iPod Shuffle with some music. I carry my Kindle so that I can read wherever I am. I carry a small transistor so that I can tune in to the local radio channels to understand what the news is. I always carry a flashlight. I carry a solar charger. I carry a small machine that makes coffee without any electricity, because I'm a coffee freak. And I carry with me always, I try to always carry with me something which is not really common, and that is common sense. I think you guys are really lucky that you have teachers who are very interested in bringing to you stories of war and peace building. But we all have a vested interest in peace. Understanding history, looking into history, being aware of current events, what is happening around you, thinking beyond your next video game, thinking beyond the model of your next mobile phone, thinking beyond the brand of sports shoes you're wearing, thinking beyond the music video that's driving you crazy. It is important to focus on lessons learned in other countries, in other places from wars, because many of these experiences, many of these lessons can be translated and are very valid in every society. A community, a society that is prepared would fare much better than a community that is ignorant and is caught unaware. So can you for a minute just think about yourself? Not some far-flung country like Sudan or Yemen or Syria or Chechnya where there's a war waging. Instead, think of your immediate surrounding. Is there a conflict that you can sense? Is there a conflict that has been brewing around you, in your class, among your friends, among your relatives, with your neighbors? Because one needs to start working on it. Otherwise, it would grow and grow and grow until it becomes a full-fledged war. It is easy to look at things which are far away and have theoretical discussions about them. But it is very important to break them down into situations which affect us individually and see how we change our behavior to address conflict. The right time to address a conflict is now.